Andrew Norris is a former captain with the U.S. Coast Guard. He joins me now from Newport in Rhode Island. Captain, good to speak to you. So as far as I know, there are two types of communications between the mini sub or the submersible and the vessel that's afloat. I mean, you have verbal communication, and then you have one tracking. And I think that the temporary loss of the connection in one isn't sort of a major red flag or a major alarm, but to have both systems down for this amount of time, this is very worrisome.
Yes. First of all, good evening, and thank you for inviting me to the show. But indeed, as I've read it, there's text communications, two-way text communications, interestingly enough, between the submersible and the support vessel. And then, as you mentioned, there's a ping that is supposed to sound every 15 minutes to alert the operators at the surface that everything is well with the sub. And the reports are that when communications were lost, both those means of communication were also lost.
How complex of a search operation is this? I mean, Captain Frederick of the U.S. Coast Guard said that they're searching an area the size of Connecticut.
It's incredibly complex, but I think it bears mention that when they're talking about an area the size of Connecticut, that's on the surface. And that is so the aviation assets and the surface assets that have been deployed are looking on the surface to see if they can find this submersible, if in fact it somehow made its way to the surface. And that is a pretty standard search and rescue operation. The other component of it, though, is is looking for it if it's somewhere in the water column or on the seabed. That's going to be a much more concentrated search. That's not the area the size of Connecticut. That's probably within a fairly close proximity of the Titanic itself, but nonetheless, still an extraordinarily complex search in its own right.
It's a good distinction that you make. Going from 2D to 3D and the thousands of meters that you have to search for. I mean, even if they are able to locate this Titan mini sub, recovering it is going to be a whole different game, isn't it?
Yes. I was slightly encouraged to read today. I think the Coast Guard news conference today is that there is a robot, a remotely operated vessel that is on scene that is starting to search. So at least that trying to find it on the sea bottom, which is going to be very difficult in its own right. At least they have already got some equipment on scene and they're starting that. But you're right, though. Once they find it, then it's an entirely separate and different question of what they're going to do about it. And that is also extraordinarily complex.
I've also come across some statements from industry leaders when it comes to the submersible sector, and that they've been sort of issuing warnings of possible catastrophic problems because of the specific design of the Titan. I mean, I'm wondering if these types of submersibles that go to the depths that they do, aren't they supposed to go through very strict certification procedures?
Well, it's interesting. So what you're alluding to is, I believe the New York Times broke that today, that in 2018, some industry leaders in the submersible field wrote a letter to the company, the operator of the Titan, and specifically about the Titan, and said, you're kind of pushing the envelope, and you risk potentially catastrophic failure. So that's fairly extraordinary in its own right, and also one of the reports, and there was a CBS reporter that had actually rowed aboard this submersible, talked about the fact that their disclaimer form said that it specifically said that it had not been approved or certified by any regulatory body. So again, your point is a good one. Shouldn't there be some oversight, some regulatory oversight? And it appears that there wasn't at least any formal oversight. Now, in the company's defense, at least their website says that it was tested with Boeing and with other, at least the hull, the main, the pressure, the component of the submersible, and the revolutionary construction that was tested with
Okay.
Boeing and other companies. So, in their view, that was there was some due diligence, as it were, but that letter you allude to from industry leaders was not certainly
Okay.
not favorable.
I also want to ask, so as far as we know, or what's being stated is that there's about, or less than 40 hours of oxygen left within this mini sub. Procedurally, what would happen next? I mean, in terms of the air assets that you alluded to, the maritime and the marine assets, what happens, or what phase of an operation does it shift into after 40 hours?
I would assume that that they will continue, and they will give some period of time beyond 40 hours, or whatever the remaining time is, just on the hope that those life support systems last a bit longer. Eventually, search and rescue turns into a recovery operation. That's always a very difficult decision to make that declaration, certainly for family members and people ashore, when it's changed from search and rescue to recovery. But eventually that will happen in this case as well.
Okay, Captain Norris, thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. Do appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.